Welcome back! Today we are going to read the next exciting installment of The Hobbit. When we left off, Bilbo was just relaxing at home when who showed up but 13 dwarves and Gandalf. Let's see what happened next. Now we're all here, said Gandalf, looking at the row of 13 hoods, the best detachable party hoods, and his own hat hanging on the pegs. Quite a merry gathering. I hope there is something left for the latecomers to eat and drink. What's that? Tea? No, thank you. A little red wine for me, I think. And for me, said Thorin. And raspberry and jam and apple tart, said Bifer. And mince pies and cheese, said Beaufort. And pork pie and salad, said Bomber. And more cakes and ale and coffee if you don't mind, called the other dwarves through the door. Put on a few eggs there, good fellow, Gandalf called after him as the hobbits stumped off to the pantries. And just bring out the cold chicken and pickles. Seems to know as much about the inside of my larders as I do myself, thought Mr. Baggins, who was feeling positively flummoxed and was beginning to wonder whether a most wretched adventure had not come right into his house. By the time he got all the bottles and dishes and knives and forks and glasses and plates and spoons and things piled up on big trays, he was getting very hot and red in the face and annoyed. Confiscate and bebother these dwarves, he said out loud. Why don't they come and lend a hand? Lo and behold, there stood Balin and Dwalin at the door of the kitchen, and Fili and Kili behind them, and before he could say knife, they had whisked the trays and a couple of small tables into the parlor and set everything out afresh. Gandalf sat at the head of the party with the 13 dwarves all around, and Bilbo sat on a stool at the fireside nibbling at a biscuit. His appetite was quite taken away, and trying to look as if this was all perfectly ordinary and not in the least an adventure. The dwarves ate and ate, and talked, and time got on. At last they pushed their chairs back, and Bilbo made a move to collect the plates and glasses. I suppose you will all stay to supper? He said in his politest, unpressing tones. Of course, said Thorin, and after. We shan't get through the business till late, and we must have some music first. So, now to clear up. Thereupon, the 12 dwarves, not Thorin, he was too important, and he stayed talking to Gandalf, jumped to their feet and made tall piles of all the things. Off they went, not waiting for trays, balancing columns of plates, each with a bottle on top with one hand, while the hobbit ran after them, almost squeaking with fright. Please be careful, and oh, please don't trouble, I can manage. But the dwarves only started to sing, and we are going to listen to the song that the dwarves sang.
And can you not do that? You'll blunt them. Ooh, do you hear that, lads? He says we'll blunt the knives.
Blunt the knives, bend the forks, smash the bottles and burn the corks, shake the glasses and crack the plates. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. Cut the cloth, trail the fat, leave the bones on the bedroom mat, pour the milk on the pantry floor, splash the wine on every door, dump the crotch in a boiling bowl, pound them up with a thumping pole, and when you finish they pay a hole. Send them down the altar road. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates.
That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. But you know what? They cleaned up. And of course they did none of these dreadful things, and everything was cleaned and put away safe as quick as lightning, while the hobbit was turning round and around in the middle of the kitchen trying to see what they were doing. They went back and found Thorin with his feet on the fender smoking a pipe. He was blowing a most enormous smoke rings, and wherever he told one to go, it went, up the chimney or behind the clock on the mantelpiece or under the table or around the ceiling, but wherever it went was not quick enough to escape Gandalf. Pop! He sent a smaller smoke ring from his short clay pipe straight through the center of each of Thorin's. Then Gandalf's smoke ring would go green and come back and hover over the wizard's head. He had a cloud of them already, and in the dim light it made him look strange and sorcerous. Bilbo stood and watched. He loved making smoke rings. And then he blushed to think how proud he had been yesterday morning of the smoke rings he had set up the wind over the hill. "Now for some music," said Thorin. "Bring out the instruments." Keely and Feely rushed to their bags and brought little fiddles. Nori and Ori brought out flutes from somewhere inside their coats. Bombur produced a drum from the hall. Bilfer and Beaufort went out too and came back with clarinets that they had left among the walking sticks. Dwalin and Balin said, "Excuse me, I left mine on the porch." "Just bring mine with you," said Thorin. They came back with viols as big as themselves. Can you see my large viol? And they brought Thorin's harp. It was wrapped in a green cloth. It was a beautiful golden harp, and when Thorin struck it, the music began all at once, and everything was swept away. They forgot everything else. Instead, they were thinking of strange lands far over the water and very far from the Hobbit hole under the hill. The dark came into the room and from the little window that opened in the side of the hill. The firelight flickered. It was April, and still they played on while the shadow of Gandalf's beard wagged against the wall. The dark filled all the room, and the fire died down, and the shadows were lost, and still they played on. And suddenly, first one and then another began to sing as they played, deep-throated singing of the dwarves in the deep places of their ancient homes. And this is like a fragment of their song, if it can be like their song without their music. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away a break of day to see the pale torches blazed with light. The bells were ringing in the dale, and men looked up with faces pale. The dragons are more fierce than fire, laid low their towers and houses frail. The mountains smoked beneath the moon. The dwarves, they heard the tramp of doom. They fled their hall to dying fall. Beneath his feet, beneath the moon. Far over the misty mountains grim, to dungeons deep and caverns dim, we must away ere break of day, to win our harps and gold from him. As they sang, the hobbit felt the love of beautiful things made by hands and by cunning magic moving through him. A fierce and a jealous love, the desire of the hearts of dwarves. Then something tookish woke up inside him, and he wished to go and see the great mountains, and hear the pine trees and the waterfalls, and explore the caves, and wear a sword instead of a walking stick. He looked out of the window. The stars were out in a dark sky above the trees. He thought of the jewels of the dwarves shining in dark caverns. Suddenly, in the wood behind the water, a flame leapt up. Probably somebody lighting a wood fire. And he thought of the plundering dragons settling on his quiet hill and kindling it all to flames. He shuddered, and very quickly he was plain Mr. Baggins of Bag End Underhill again. This is where we will stop today. Thank you so much for listening. In that song, we heard a little bit of the history of the dwarves, of the adventure they want to have and the treasure which they will seek. Today's lesson, we will look at some pictures. We heard about some of the delicious foods that they ate at Bilbo Baggins' house, so we're going to look at some pictures of some of the foods they ate. We will listen to some more music, and we'll listen to some of the instruments that the dwarves brought. And next week, we're going to find out what happens next in our story. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next week.